Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Luke Johnson and Robert Schut. This is our 11th installment of our seminar on Soren Kierkegaard's Philosophical Fragments. I'm live from the Russ Library in Leesburg, Virginia, the Bear Study Carol, and Robert is in Sacramento. He'll be taking the lead today, finishing up some of the supplement from chapter 4. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
Okay, well, after our last meeting, I thought that it'd be best to kind of do a little overlap, not really a review, but to start a little bit before where we left off, just to capture some more of the meat of what Kierkegaard was after here. And I have it labeled under my own rubric of testimony. One who isn't an historical contemporary has no sense of the act taking place. He has the testimony of the contemporaries. Both the contemporary and the non-contemporary stand related in the same manner. And I think what he's getting at here is if somebody experienced something historically and you weren't there at the time, and then they come back and then they're going to tell you everything that happened as a testimony, now you're standing at a little, in a way, like he says, you're in the same place, but in a way you're in a different place. Because the one who was the historical contemporary, who actually lived it with another individual, is telling you about it. And you kind of feel like you're getting it secondhand. And in chapter 5, the next chapter, that's what it's all about, the secondhand person. But here, this is what we're going to try to view. We're going to try to see what's the difference between the historical contemporary and between the one hearing the testimony. And basically, he says that the difference is that one has that experience and the other one, for him, it's an occasion, which means it's almost accidental. The non-contemporary can't take it into his consciousness without consenting. He must willingly decide to believe, and by so doing makes it historical for himself. So when somebody brings a testimony and he says, hey, Luke, I want to tell you about a situation that happened, last year to me or something. Well, now you're in a situation here. You've got a choice to make. If you decide you're going to believe this individual, then it becomes historical for you too. If you decide to doubt him, well, then it's not historical for you. So this is why Kierkegaard went through that whole little story about doubting and about it being choice, about our senses don't really tell us anything. We have to decide what our senses are telling us. So this is kind of like a build-up from that point. So one must decide to either doubt or believe, as the senses do not deceive, and nor do they decide for us. So with our senses, we experience the event, whether it's a testimony or the contemporary event, but it's our mind, our ability to make a decision, that's going to actually bring us to either one of those categories of believe or not believe. The testimony is there, and this is what is immediate to the senses. So for the person listening, that's his immediate history. He's a contemporary with the testimony. He may not be a contemporary with the historical event, but he is contemporary with the person telling the story. The past was once the present when it came into existence. The successor believes the past not because of existence, but because of essence. So again, if we can picture ourselves in a situation where we're listening to somebody, that is soon going to become a past as well. And we may go to somebody else and say to them, hey, I heard this great story, this interesting story from a friend of mine, and we retell it. So now we were contemporary with the story and we're creating a new present. And he kind of deals with that as later on, I think when we get to chapter 5, goes, well, how many iterations and what does that mean? For the guy way down the end of the line who's getting the story like the 5th, the 6th, the 7th generation of the story. Is it any different for him than it is for the contemporary? It's kind of an interesting question. But another thing I just want to emphasize, I have emphasized in my notes, is that the difference between existence and essence here, that the successor, which would be the person hearing the testimony, he believes that the past happened not really because of the existence, because he certainly wasn't there, but because of the essence. Now, this is a thought he's going to develop here. So I'm going to just kind of go with that rather than try to explain it. But you remind us that the essence is the quality of the testimony, what it means, or what we recognize it to mean. So it's more that the ephemeral idea behind the story. It's the essence that maintains from the present to the past. He believes the past was once present. The uncertainty he has is present in the past, which is the object of his belief. He may believe, but the doubt remains that it came into existence. But this also exists for the contemporary. Both must accept coming into existence as an item of faith. It cannot be believed through the senses. So the essence that maintains from the present to the past is that we have an experience in existence, but they also contain an essence. And he's really bringing this up now at this point in time because this is the connection that's extremely important as to why are we going to believe or why are we going to doubt. Because there's something that's common between the history and the present and even the future. And what is that? It's the essence. That doesn't change. So we have to bear mind with that. So what kind of doubt does the contemporary have of existence? Only of coming into existence. So what we experience, if we're the contemporary, what we experience, we probably don't have a whole lot of doubt about the temporary because that comes through our senses. But we still have an experience of the past, of the historical, that is doubted. The successor believes because of the testimony of the individual, but only in the same sense as a contemporary believes through his senses. I believe that I'm hearing the story as a contemporary, but I cannot believe on that alone. So again, as we engage the testimony of an individual, we hear that with our senses. But we can't say because our senses hear it that proves it's true. Because there's more going on rather than just the senses here. And it's, can we really, the question came to my mind, can we really isolate the present from the historical? Is it possible that we can have something that's present without a history, that's totally isolated from the historical? I don't think we can. I think all present contains with it some kind of historical idea. And the essence must be revealed as truth by the God. So when we hear a story, a testimony, the essence is what we're looking for more than anything else. That's the common point that is going to help us decide, do we believe or don't we believe? But as he showed us before, the difference between Climacus's way of believing and Socrates' way of believing is that this comes through something that's either implanted in us or something that's revealed by the God. And so Climacus is telling us this is a truth as far as he's concerned. It's not a truth that lives in us. It's a truth that's going to be revealed by God.
I think something we'll have to talk about is trying to understand if there are corollaries between what Kierkegaard calls ordinary faith and that which is immanent faith, and this coming into existence and the essence idea that you speak of. Because every event that comes into existence is going to require ordinary faith for Kierkegaard, right? Like the star coming into existence. We talked about who discovered America in our last installment. We had to determine what we were going to just will to believe, right? There's no real knowledge of those things. We just sort of choose what narrative we're going to believe. But there's something that increases the uncertainty of this particular essence of the Christian faith coming into existence that precipitates a different sort of faith, the immanent sort of faith, the E-M-I-N-E-N-T kind of faith, not immanent I-M-M-A-N-E-N, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T sort of position that Socrates was in, and we'll take that up in the supplement. But I think we're going to try to have to develop how these different types of faith correlate to all of what you've just said. Don't you think that will be kind of part of the challenge of the supplement?
Oh, as I was reading and thinking myself, I kind of have a summation where I bring that up as well as, is this, what kind of faith is he speaking about here? Is this the ordinary faith that we have? Probably not exactly, but is there a connection? And in a way, I can see the connection between faith that he's speaking about and between the ordinary faith that we might have. I think that there may be a connection, so that would be an interesting discussion that you and I can have on that.
Yeah, because presumably, if you view Christ as a historical figure, like let's just say you thought he was like maybe a misguided but wonderfully powerful moral instructor. You don't believe that he was the Son of God. But you do believe that a man named Jesus Christ existed at such and such time, did such and such things. That requires a certain amount of ordinary faith, just as it requires having a certain amount of ordinary faith that Napoleon existed, or that we landed on the moon, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But we typically don't have imminent faith in Napoleon or the moon landing. Imminent, again, in that sense, the culminating and best form of faith, not the Socratic recollection of imminence, but this most highly prized faith, and
the committed faith.
Yeah. So I wonder if that has a connection to the essence. I feel like you have a better handle on the essence thing, but we'll develop that a little bit more. Something I wanted to ask you. I noticed your phone was going off. Are we cool to proceed, or do you need to take that phone?
I thought I got rid of everything here, but I think I missed that my cell phone. Let me just put that outside.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. And while Bob's doing that, I'm just going to encourage everyone, if you're interested in the products that we make here at Noetic, to go download the Noetic app. And if you're listening to this in the future, we'll have a website and stuff where you can take advantage of more materials and congregate with other people that think like you. All right, Bob, you ready to jump back?
I apologize to everybody. I thought I got rid of all my noisemakers, but one caught me by surprise there. Okay, right. So
you ready?
Yeah, we'll continue here. So at no time does the past become necessary simply because it came into existence. So now we enter into the idea of the necessary or necessity. So we'll have to distinguish the difference here. For the contemporary, he had to believe it came into existence, but necessity is wholly a matter of essence. Okay, so this is where now he kind of is bringing up essence. He's been talking about existence pretty much throughout this whole thing, but now he's going to enter in a little bit more on the essence side, so give us a little more insight into that. Does came into existence, this is my question, it's maybe a discussion question here. Does when he uses the term came into existence, is that an expression for being historically true? Can we say that they're pretty much the same thing? If say that it came into existence is the same thing as being historically true?
Well, I would view, from what I understand of Kierkegaard and his understanding of history, that that being historically true would be a bit of an absurdity. It would be a bit of a contradiction in terms. There is not, that history is necessarily going to be an approximation and not really something that can be validated and have the form of truth.
Yeah, well, I meant in the sense that we could tell a story that is historical, but it isn't necessarily true. It could be a story based upon an event that happened, but we're taking liberties and adding fiction into it, you know, like we're going to tell a story about the Civil War and a romance that happened during the Civil War. It might be based on history, but it actually isn't historically true. I understand what you're saying there. Yeah. So I'm just trying to make a distinction between an untrue something that supposedly takes place in history versus something that really is historical. Do you think he's trying to make that distinction here?
I would say that it's, and people can correct me, my understanding of Kierkegaard and history is that all of it is an approximation, and some versions of history are truer than others, but there is not a sort of definitive historical truth.
Okay.
Because it necessarily involves an inference where we have to exclude certain evidence to the contrary and come up with a narrative. Mm-hmm. I think I used the example in one of the podcasts with the streaking star about how scientific paradigms shift and will shift again, and the story we tell about a streaking star coming into existence will inevitably change the more that we learn. So I see historical truth as something that lies on a spectrum for Kierkegaard and never fully obtained.
Okay. Fair enough. In the necessary, the possible clings to the actual. That was his words. But I want to make sure that we understand it's not a synthesis. He's not talking about a synthesis when he says the necessary clings to the actual, but it's more of a fusion where each maintains its original quality. So you can say, we can speak of the necessary and the possible, and they're together, yet they maintain their distinctive qualities. Otherwise, we'd have a synthesis, and I don't believe he means that we have a synthesis, because that's what his argument was against. Each successor believes it came into existence by faith. So any kind of historical situation that happens, we have to determine if we're going to believe it. It's an issue of faith, in other words. All history is an issue of faith.
Right.
How much can we believe that history book? How much can we believe that story, that testimony? It's all a matter of faith.
Exactly.
You make a distinction of different kinds of faith, but he's just kind of using the generic faith here for now. Okay, now we enter into the supplement, page 107 for me.
Does that make sense to you about why if history is on a spectrum, why it would necessarily involve ordinary faith to one degree or another?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to deal with that later on too.
Okay.
Yeah, there's different kinds of history. There's the history that we commit ourselves to intellectually, that we say, okay, I'm going to accept that as historical. But the kind of history he's really getting at here is more historical with the divine flavor to it. Mm-hmm. In other words, the appearance of God in history. So I have to keep reminding myself that he's not really talking about a generic faith so much as he's speaking about a specific issue of faith here.
Right.
Okay. So he talks about a contradiction now. He opens it up with contradiction. And he uses this term throughout his work, throughout this work, Fragments, quite a bit, and it doesn't always mean the same thing. So I kind of had to go back and research all the different meanings of contradiction to figure out which particular one does he mean here. So I'm kind of taking a shot at it here. But I take this to mean that the contradiction is between the possible and the actual, because that's what he's speaking about here, where it remains both possible and actual. And then he deals with how does something go from the possible to the actual. So he talks about the possible and the actual, and now he says, okay, earlier in the earlier chapters, I was saying that something is possible, it can't be actual. And something is actual, it can't be possible. So there's some sort of a transition that happens when something goes from the possible to the actual. Right. So he says, well, let's take a few minutes and take a look at this. What actually remains the same or doesn't remain the same? So we need to understand what happens when something changes being from possible to actual. And that's what we also have to remember is his distinction between being and essence. So change from possible to actual is a change of being.
Right.
Okay, not a change of essence. He says that it's an illusion to think that one can understand its coming into existence after the event, meaning historical, better than before the event takes place, the future. For he has only the present senses to work with. So he's kind of pitting us here in different postures. He's saying it's an illusion to think that one can understand coming into existence after it happens better than before it happens, meaning looking at it as a future event, which might seem a little strange. But he's dealing, I think, what he means here is the difference between testimony of what happened and prophecy of what will happen. So he's almost saying, what's the difference between believers in the post-New Testament and the pre-New Testament, which would be the Old Testament? Do you see that as a possible meaning here? I might be reading that into this here, but I took the future to mean more like a prophecy of what will happen.
Yeah, I mean, presumably those were the individuals that he had in mind. I mean, when I think about prophecy, I don't necessarily, my mind doesn't first go to Old Testament prophets. It should. I tend to think of, examples that we have from the 20th century of cult leaders and things like that that postulated that, at the end of the world was going to happen in 2012, or the Haley comic was going to swoop by and pick you up and you had to wear these Nikes and stuff like that. But presumably in 1843, Kierkegaard was concerned with those types of future tellers, fortune tellers.
Yeah. Well, he had some of those guys in his day too.
Yes, which I really do think is why it's important to say that Book of Adler on Authority and Revelation, or whatever that book is called, it haunts me.
Okay, well, we'll put that definitely on the list in bold then.
Yeah.
Now, he may know that the object that he senses exists, but he does not know that it came into existence. At least he does not know that it came into existence, when it came in, and how it came into existence. Nor would he be able to know this from seeing it in the possibility or from the future perspective. So if we kind of pit one against the other, if somebody tells you a story of what happened, you need to believe it. You need to set your mind that you're not going to doubt, that you're going to believe in it. And the same thing if somebody tells you what's about to happen in the future, how do you know? Well, you have to either decide to doubt it or to believe it. But I guess you also have, of course, the idea is you can kind of put it off to the side, but you can do that with both as well. Waiting for further proof, being the agnostic somewhat. But he's saying there's no advantage for the person who's either hearing what's going to happen or hearing what has happened. So history and prophecy are on the same level as far as faith is concerned. Limits of certainty. This is where he's going to take us now with the senses. So Kierkegaard is trying to put us in a position to see the limitations of our certainty. When we begin to think of God's existence in these terms, we find that our senses cannot show that God has been, whether they are the senses of the contemporary or the non-contemporary. And this kind of puzzled me for a little while. I thought about this, and I'm thinking, I think what he's talking about here is that God is pure essence, and therefore there would be no advantage or disadvantage from either point of view, because the essence is really required to recognize it's God, to know it's God. This is a unique historical fact about God existing, and it's based upon a self-contradiction. Now, again, he brings up the term self-contradiction between God coming into existence, the idea that God is eternal, yet he comes into existence. This is the contradiction I think he has in mind here.
So I just want to ask you this, Bob, and your understanding of it. The way that Kierkegaard has set up this metaphysical schema of essence and existence and whatnot, would it be the case, because everything else is non-eternal, that God, on Kierkegaard's view, would be the only essence? Because if there could be other essences, could they not be equally contradictory in some way? I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes I worry that if there are essences that can undergo changes in being, from non-existence or from possibility to actuality, then we enter into this sort of Platonic understanding of the thing where there are forms and a demiurge and all of that. But if there's really only one essence, and that essence is God, then the contradiction is very special when it comes into existence. Well, where do you stand on all of that?
Well, that's a good question. Prior to you bringing it up, I simply thought that this was God's unique essence, because he's speaking in the reference or the context of eternal. Mm-hmm. Because I do think there are other essences that may retain itself, but are not eternal. Okay, so I would say the distinction that, yes, there are other essences, but we're talking here about an eternal essence, a very unique essence as well. Not just because God is eternal, but his character, his very character is in his essence.
So you know the way that I would maybe try to resolve this idea, and I'm just riffing here. I'm not, because I don't think, I think Bob has done an incredible job trying to splay this open, because I don't think Kierkegaard is nearly as lucid as Bob is on these issues. My tendency to think is, if there are other essences, well, how do you make it so that, like, God is the supreme essence, right, and is like the sole eternal thing, but yet other things could be essences? And the only way I could really think about that would be to kind of do kind of a Berkeleyan kind of move where the other essences are sort of parasitic and maintained in the mind of God somehow, that they're ideas of God, so that they're not independent of God or something like that. What do you think about that?
Well, it may take us all the way back to Genesis, and God created man in his image. And when he created man, he gave him an essence. Mm-hmm. But it was an essence, again, a created essence, not an eternal essence. This may come a little bit clearer as we get more to the end.
Okay, sure. Sorry, okay, just merely erasing it.
No, that's good, because I think that's important, because it reflects how we're thinking, and hopefully the rest of the dialogue will answer those questions as we're going along, because those are natural questions to have. And I think Kierkegaard, when he writes, he takes that into consideration. What will the audience be thinking when I say this? And so it's part of him bringing us to the conclusion. So I think that he deals with that a little bit. If not, I do deal with that a little bit more, because I had a similar question as you do. So hopefully I was able to answer that, or at least put a little bit more meat on the bones.
All right, well, we'll see what happens.
Okay. Now, this is no different between the immediate and the successor, Now, he uses different terms here. The immediate is the person who's experiencing the present, and the successor is the person who's listening to the story about the other person's experiences. Yet it is an historical fact for someone who apprehends it by faith, by commitment, resolve to believe. So coming into existence is a change that cannot be apprehended by the senses, but it's apprehended by our commitment to it, by our decision to believe. So he kind of developed that idea between what the senses can do and what the senses cannot do. The senses cannot make us believe something. We have to make that choice of will ourselves. So when we look at it from the eternal point of view, we do not exercise faith. We might make an assumption, but it is not an act of faith. We're not believing that the eternal is historical. Now, in my notes, I have the explanation follows, but just something to kind of sweeten the idea here a little bit. It's along the ideas of what you were saying as well. How do we recognize the essence of God if there's other essences out there? So Socrates, now he brings us back to Socrates. He said he arrived at the idea that the God existed by means of his recollection.
Right.
For it was within this area of essence and not being.
Right. So what does that mean? Did Socrates have any kind of faith? Kierkegaard's going to say, from what I can understand, because Socrates recollected the essence and didn't merely will to believe the historical coming into existence, that he doesn't have ordinary or imminent faith. That's what I got from that.
I think you're right. I think that's what he's trying to point out here, is that because Socrates believed that in this idea of recollection, recollection was a recollection of the essence. It wasn't a historical recollection because that requires faith. So it was a recollection of the essence. Then he continues on here, and
let me ask you something about that.
All right.
I'm sorry, because I got to hold you up. This presupposes that Socrates was actually able to recollect, right?
Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically. And we've talked about this, that what Socrates believed he was able to recollect and what Plato thought Socrates were able to recollect are two different things. But I would, if Kierkegaard does say that Socrates is without faith, that he is merely recollecting the essence and he doesn't have ordinary or imminent faith, I would say he doesn't have faith in the historical, but he definitely has faith. He is willing to believe that he has like epistemological access to the essence, and he has faith in his organ to discern that. So he has an ordinary sort of faith there. It's just not for discerning the historical. It's just for Socratic recollection. What do you think about that? It seems like to me he does have ordinary faith in his abilities.
One might be able to make that connection. Now that I hear you, now that you're saying it, that one might be able to make that connection. When we get into another topic, when he gives us a little transition here, let's see if that clears up, though.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to answer you specifically on that. That's a really a good question. So, and I don't really know the answer.
That's fine.
Okay.
You sound like me. You sound like me.
Deflection. Yeah, deflection here. Socrates arrived at the idea that God existed by means of his recollection, for it was within the area of essence and not of being that existed here. I don't know if that helps a little bit or not. Essence transcends the change from not being to being. Remember, he said here what he's going to do. He says, let's take a look at how something goes from possible to actual. So we want to keep that in mind. What's his focus here? So essence transcends the change from not being or from being possible to becoming actual or to being. It continues unchanged. It remains essence. So Socrates could recall the essence of God. Okay. So when we deal with the essence here, Socrates, and it does go back to the idea of forms in my mind as well, that if he saw the forms in his prenatal life, if he saw the forms, now he's recollecting the forms. So does that require faith? I don't think it does in the way that Kierkegaard is bringing it up. I think it requires recollection, not faith.
You know what it's analogous to? He doesn't say. I guess the point, you could counter the point that I was making, because what does Kierkegaard think is certain? The only thing that Kierkegaard thinks is certain, right? What is it?
Well, it would probably be the essence.
Well, it's our ability to discern immediate sense impressions, right? He says it's not dubious. I can't doubt the star,
okay.
Right? He says I can't doubt the star in the sky, or the fact that, like, I'm looking at your notes on my computer right now. Like, I can't doubt that. That's totally.
You can't doubt the senses. Okay.
So maybe he could say that Socratic recollection, if doable, is just like immediate sense perception. Socrates is just merely reading off the forms, like I'm reading off your notes.
Okay. Well, this last note, I don't know if this was in the updated version here.
And that's why it's not faith. Like, I don't have faith in my senses because recollection is a sense, and I wouldn't have faith in that either. It's just a form of sense perception, and we don't have faith in sense perception.
Yeah, I think that's it, because the very next sentence, and again, I'm not sure if I had this in my notes, that the copy you have, he says that he did not need to exercise faith because faith is used to believe that something existed in history, being, not essence. So he would have had to exercise faith if he was going to think of the God in terms of being. But he doesn't. He thinks of him in terms of essence. Therefore, it doesn't reach that necessity to believe using faith.
Right.
He can still get away with his recollection because he's still in the form, which is essence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he did not believe that God existed in a historical sense, as one might believe King Arthur existed or Abraham Lincoln existed. And this gets back to what you were saying earlier about, I think you said Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of an idea. So he didn't believe that God existed in that historical sense, but he did believe he existed in the sense of forms and the sense of not presence, in the sense of essence. But the contemporary learner believes that God did come into existence or history as the teacher, which would require faith. So he's making that distinction, I think, that you are asking about. So belief in God, and kind of a little summary on my part here, belief in God is the essence requires awareness of essence, which I call revelation. And God in existence requires faith. So I'm adding a little bit here. I'm saying God in existence requires faith, but God in essence requires revelation, which is what the teacher gives to the student. What the teacher is to the student, so to speak. Okay? So that was that ingredient that was missing all along, right from the very beginning, that he's trying to tell us, how does the teacher give us truth?
Right.
Well, I'm saying the teacher gives us truth by revelation. Now, to support myself biblically on this issue, if anybody cares, we have the confession of Peter.
I do.
Peter in Matthew chapter 15, verse 16, where Jesus says, "But who do you say that I am, Peter?" And he says, "You're the Christ." No, and he says, "Blessed are you, Simon, because this has been revealed to you by God, not by your circumstances." It's paraphrasing it, but this is because this is a revelation. Because flesh and blood has not reveal this to you, but my heavenly Father. So this is the kind of issue that comes under revelation. You can't make yourself believe in God. It has to be done. The teacher has to give this to you. See, this is what Kierkegaard is saying kind of all along here. You can't force yourself through to have faith in God. It has to come through revelation first.
Right. But, and this gets into some like really dense thickets of theology, right? Is that who is this revelation given to, Bob?
Well, it was given to Peter.
I guess it means, what does it mean to give a revelation? I mean, presumably it depends on your theological strain, right? Like, is this revelation given to everyone?
Well, I'm tying revelation into essence.
Mm-hmm.
How does one see the essence of someone else? They have to reveal their essence to the other person. It has to be revealed. Doesn't mean the person is going to see it.
Right. Well,
but it has to be revealed. And there's another dynamic that's at work there is Kierkegaard is saying, when the essence is revealed, you can doubt it or you can believe it.
Well, I think the question I'm getting at here is, does Kierkegaard believe in a limited disclosure of that revelation or a universal disclosure of that revelation? Because they're obviously, like the Puritans believe themselves to have some sort of unique pact with God or whatever. And I think it's an interesting question about who has access to this revelation for Kierkegaard. I don't know if I don't know if you have any feelings about that.
Well, I could give you my own personal insight, which is all I can offer.
I would like your personal. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I learned from you, so yeah, I would very much like that.
I think that the New Testament agrees and accepts the idea that there is a universal revelation of God in nature. Paul says that even nature reveals the things of God. So there is a universal understanding of God that we can all come to, his essence. But there are more historical specificity in Christ. For instance, one can't believe that Christ is the Son of God unless he sees the essence of God in Christ.
Right.
But when he does see the essence of God, the general essence of God in Christ, it now takes upon the form of a specific revelation of God as Savior.
Right.
Now, so the primitive man wasn't able to really come to that specific idea of God, but he was able to come to a more general idea of God because that was what he had at his disposal. In other words, this is where we see the clash of the essence with the historical. So in Christ, we see both. We see the paradox. But what we see is the essence of God that we recognize, that we can recognize him as the Son of God. And at the same time, the historical quality is we now see God as salvation. So the two come together, yet they're still unique. They're still what they are. They still remain or maintain their own qualities.
I have so many theological questions because the reason, not because I'm tied in knots by it. I have my own general feelings about it. I tend to think that, and you can correct me if you're wrong. I don't know how much right or wrongness goes into this, but just my general sort of proclivities and instincts about the whole matter is it seems like Kierkegaard and the Protestant message is one that it seems like with Kierkegaard, it's that it doesn't seem like he believes in a God that is merciless if you're doing everything you can, yet don't receive that special revelation of God's essence in the form of the Christ. He seems to be sympathetic. There's the line from the Concluding on Scientific Postscript where he says he asks us to consider the cultural Christian who just kind of goes through the motions of praying versus like the pagan that like passion and intensity of infinity to to an idol, he says that there's more truth on the side of the pagan. Now, obviously, the best situation in Kierkegaard's view is for someone to be exposed to Christ and to have that infinitely intense relationship with Christ. But I don't know. I tend to take a perspective that God is pretty merciful towards those individuals who strive to know God, yet are, for whatever reason, are not fully introduced to the Christ. Is that bad theology on your view? I mean, I don't want to put you too much on the spot. It's kind of a grenade. It's kind of a hot button issue, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with in the Christian faith. And I guess the reason why I ask you is because I know just waltz into Christianity. I know you've studied all the world religions, and I think you probably have a pretty worldly perspective on it. I'm just kind of curious, since we are talking about universal and limited essence revelation, what your kind of general sentiments are. And it's a topic for another day, but I'm just kind of curious where you are on that. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But
No. That's what we do here. That's the whole idea, is to be open and discuss things and not be afraid to reveal our thoughts and our ideas. Whether I'm wrong or not, I can always be corrected. But I tend to see it Kierkegaard's way. I don't know whether I'm reading that into Kierkegaard for my own views or not, but I've wrestled with that issue many times, come to my own conclusions. That's probably, we could talk for hours on that. But no, general revelation of God is for everybody. It's for the, I don't want to label him the pagan, but I'll say for the person, the primitive man who sees nature and says, what a beautiful thing, there's got to be something behind it, and seeks out this revelation to say, please, if there's a God out there, talk to me, let me know you're here. Somebody who has a sincere effort, as Kierkegaard was talking about. Yes, there's a value in that. Otherwise, and what maybe some Christians don't realize is, otherwise we totally wipe out early Judaism. The whole Jewish religion is wiped out because they didn't know Christ, and that doesn't make any sense. So it's not just those people who recognize Christ. We have an advantage because we can see with much more precision and with much more detail, much more beauty in God and revelation in God. And we actually have more of a responsibility. With that revelation comes more of a responsibility to act upon it. So primitive man, God would be very merciful on primitive man because he didn't have the Christ. But on us who have the Christ and reject him, or have him and only accept him in word only, I think he's going to be a lot tougher on us. He said, look, I've given you everything and you haven't responded. I've done everything I possibly could and you've just kind of wasted it. So I think he would be more harsh, if we want to say it, on today, post-Christian era, than he is on the pre-Christian era. Does that put things in a better perspective?
It does, but it raises a million questions, right? I've got to bring this to a close because I've got a million other things to do today. But can I just sow these questions, and we can maybe you and I'll talk about it off camera one day.
Yeah, sure.
But I think what's very interesting is that there are certain people within the Old Testament that got a special revelation. I think specifically of Abraham, who Kierkegaard dwells on in Fear and Trembling. Yeah, he does not know Christ,
right?
But he's not in a position of your everyday Jew. He is given some advance on faith of the imminent. So I guess the question for you: where does Abraham fit in? And I honestly I struggle with that. I don't really. It seems like Abraham seems to be somewhere in between Socrates and us. So that's just one issue, and that's just one issue I'll leave us with. I could raise there's a whole other can of worms.
Let me give you just a real quick answer on that, because you've probably piqued the interest of some of the listeners as to how would I respond to that. I think that I based my understanding of God that he's fair. So whatever he give, and Jesus gave the parable is, unto him that has been given a lot, more will be expected. Unto him that has been given less, less will be expected. So for Abraham, who was given more of a revelation, more will be expected of him. For the other Jew, where less, the guy out in the fields, you know, who didn't get to the temple every week, less is expected of him. So it's that kind of an issue. I think God is totally fair with it. And so I trust God to make that right call.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these questions are above our pay grade. I think Kierkegaard.
Of course.
Kierkegaard would be like, start shaking me and go, stop asking these things and work on your own faith project. Like,
yeah, leave Bob alone, will you?
Yeah, I was hard on you today.
Do you want me to continue on, or do you want to?
Oh, is there more?
Yeah, I got some more yet.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we
not
were
much
finished.
more. A little bit more. We got a little bit more.
All right. Yeah, go ahead and finish it up.
Okay. So what we're finally coming to is God coming into existence as a man in our history. There's no advantage to the contemporary because he could not sense this taking place, but had to believe through his faith as we do. So he challenges the idea of what does it mean to be a contemporary? And we talked about this a little bit. It would have to be to spend every living, waking moment with Christ in order to claim to really be a contemporary. Otherwise, there would always be a little doubt. You know, and there still was. And I think the evidence is even those who walked with him had doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And even Judas, who walked with him more than many other people, obviously didn't believe. So it kind of tells us that there certainly is an offset here with God. The historical fact stands before us, and there is no immediate contemporary. We must believe it, and there can be no proof of it. So it is the essence of God that we, and in my own words here, it's the essence of God that we perceive Christ, which must be revealed. But the historical fact of the Christ requires faith. Faith is our commitment to believe in the historical, what is revealed by the essence. So every time a believer makes this fact an object of his faith and he makes it historical for himself, he believes that it comes into existence. So one must first be acquainted with the essence of God to recognize him in existence. One of the problems that we have, Luke, and kind of a little bit of a summary, but one of the problems we have today is people who are willing to go back into the Socratic method and merely say, it really doesn't matter whether Christ lived historically or not, as long as we've got his teachings, you know, beautiful teachings, you know, we've got that. So it doesn't matter whether he was a real character or not. And you can now, since we've all been educated, we can hear the Socratic method echo right there, that it's the teaching, not the teacher. Mm-hmm. But what's the missing factor here is recognizing that Christ is the revelation of the essence of God. And that is the missing criteria. Why people say, well, I wish I could believe, but I just can't believe. They don't want to make a commitment because they miss the essence of God. They haven't put themselves before God, as Kierkegaard will teach us way later on, are not willing to stand before God as who they are. And that's really the criteria. So that's all I have for today, my friend.
You did a great job. I know I was examining you. But, you know, I think it's good. I think it's good because I think we answered a lot of the questions that we wouldn't normally have answered. And I think we had a lot of fruitful digressions, too, that I think people would probably be interested in. Hopefully, you won't be too upset at me for that.
Oh, I am not. You know that I'm not. The reason I've tortured myself with those very same questions are to share the answers with other people, because it does me no good to keep those opinions in my own head. I like to share it with other people. Sometimes it helps people. Sometimes people might write back and say, "Hey, you know, you're way off," and that's okay. You know, I can be shaped and formed as well.
Sure,
that's okay.
Definitely. All right. Well, I'm going to bring this session to a close. We'll powwow off camera here and figure out how we want to proceed. So thank you everybody for listening. Go download the Noetic app. We have so much coming for you. We're really working hard to introduce something new into the world. Just kind of stay tuned. Downloading the app is the best way you can kind of support us right now, and just stay tuned for updates. Okay, see ya. Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye.